when I think about God's word and Jesus and all that he lived for and all that he said, there was some pretty crazy stuff. There was some pretty radical things that he said and that he did and that he constantly lived out. As I read God's word, I just see so much radical things that just turned life upside down happen. I mean, he said the most unheard of things, the things that you were so unused to, things that you actually told yourself, like, how could he say these things? I mean, a few of those things in his word was this: you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, or a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. That was unheard of. I mean, you literally paid back people for what they did. It was totally foreign to what people were used to. Another one of the things that Jesus said, he said, you have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. I mean, that was totally unheard of. He flipped life upside down when he said those words. I want you to love your enemy. And that's exactly the type of lifestyle Jesus wanted us to do. He wanted to live a radical life. You know, when I think of Jesus' definition of radical, I think of something totally unexplainably foreign to how our culture is used to doing things. That's what I think of. I think of something totally unexpected. I think of something that's totally out of the ordinary, yet has a high standard. That's what I think of. You know, I challenge some of my students to live a radical life in certain areas that they were struggling in. I said, I want you to try to live radical. And I gave them examples on how they can do that. And with one of my students, it was in the area of how he has relationships with friends and his girlfriend. And you know, he texted me a couple days after that, and he told me, he said, hey, I just want you to know that there were so many opportunities I had to make out with this girl I like, but I didn't do it because I'm trying to change. That's radical. That's radical for our culture, because I think anybody and almost everybody would have took those opportunities that he had. You know, another example was one of my students was struggling with his parents, always getting into fights and arguments, and things weren't going too well for him at home. So I challenged him. Hey, I want you to be radical. I want you to think about this. And I gave him some examples on how to be radical. It wasn't but the next night that he texted me and said, you know, maybe this radical stuff really works. And I think it only works because Jesus works. Jesus works. Jesus was radical and Jesus works, and that's why it worked. Is because he decided at that moment that outside of culture and outside of how the world does things, he was going to live above that. With a higher standard, he was going to live radically. Another example was of a guy who goes to our church. He owns his own business, and his business was struggling financially with the economy. And he had a choice. Do I let people go, or do I keep them on and maybe my business plunders? And he decided, you know what, I'm gonna cut pay, I'm gonna bring them down a little bit, but I'm gonna keep them on because those people have family. And I'll tell you right now, that's radical. That's radical. And I think that's the call. I think the call is that we as Christians, we need to set the standard higher, because it needs to be God's standard, not ours, not the world's. And that's what it's all about. That's how you live a successful Christian life, is you follow Jesus closely, and that means living radically. And I think we would look so much more different than what we do now. I mean, I think there wouldn't be staggering statistics of how Christians fall short 24/7, and they rationalize it by using verses out of context and saying, oh, we all sin, we all fall short. What if the standard was always high and it never changed because we constantly desire to be more like Christ? I mean, I know it's hard, but It comes down to this. It's one simple question. Do you want Christ in your life, and are you willing to die and live for Him? There's only one choice, and that's, up or down. It's not left or right. It's not all around you. It's a one-way ticket, and you choose to where it's going to end up. Jesus, He said it like this. He said in Matthew 7:13, He said, "Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go by it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it." I like that because He doesn't set us up for anything confusing. He tells us from the get-go. Hey, there's a lot of people, they take the easy way, and there are so many people that go that way. But there are only a few people who choose to live radically and choose to follow me, Christ. And so the question is, who do you choose? Do you choose to go the way where everyone is going, or do you choose to go just that one way, which is straight to Christ? Do you want to look like Him? How are you living radical in your lives?